Hello, viewers. Today we've got Jake with us, and we're going to be talking about the Japanese mafia. Is it pronounced Yakuza?
It is pronounced Yakuza. That is correct.
Okay. My sister
So
lived in Japan. My
they
sister
have
lived in.
many names for themselves and many names in Japan.
Yeah, my sister's fluent in Japanese. She lived there for many years, and she really
Cool.
loved it. She told me about the Yakuza. So, Jake, can you just start out by telling the viewers a little bit about you and what got you onto this?
Sure. I came to Japan in 1988 as an exchange student, and my first job out of college was working for a Japanese newspaper, the Yomiuri Shimbun, which is the biggest newspaper in Japan. Um, I think it had 10 million readers at its peak. As newspaper, readers decline, maybe 6 million. And like every reporter in Japan, you start on the police beat. That's where everybody starts. Sorry, I'm going to try and turn off the various doodads on the computer. Let's see if we can get the mail to turn off without turning off you guys. Um, and so I think the very first year that I was on the beat, there was a complicated case involving a serial killer, actually a husband and wife team of serial killers. And one of their victims was a Yakuza boss and the Yakuza boss driver. And part of my job was trying to find out, in the stages when we didn't actually know what had happened to them, what had happened to them. Um, and that was the beginning of sort of having to chase around Yakuza and deal with them. Um, my reward for a job well done was my second year. I was put on the police headquarters in Saitama, which is kind of outside of Tokyo. It's sort of the Brixton of Tokyo. My boss told me, okay, Adelstein, like your assignment now is you're going to be covering theft, public security, and organized crime task force 1 and 2. And actually, I was hoping to cover homicide because that was a much more sexy job to have at the time. Um, and he was like, well, 30% of the Yakuza are foreigners, the Koreans, some Taiwanese, and you're a foreigner, so you should fit right in. And and that began the 30 years of covering Japan's organized crime groups, of which there are many. I think when people say the Yakuza, um, that's confusing because it's not a monolithic organization. It's not one. It's about 25 different organizations, each with its own turf and territory, history, um, power structures, names for their bosses. Fortunately, if you're a young reporter starting on this job, you can go to the newsstand and buy a Yakuza fan magazine, which will have a picture of all the various guys and their names and their titles and their organizations. And, you can study so you can sort of know who's who. Um, just like in the TV series, that's one thing that that we got right. Yeah, there are Yakuza fanzines. They're very useful if you're trying to know who's who in that world.
Well, you've got me gripped from the get-go. So many questions. I don't know whether to start with the serial killer stuff or no. Let's go over some basics first.
Okay,
So, we think when we hear mafia, we think of the Italian mafia, and perhaps we're aware of how that started and how it's structured. I have no idea how the Yakuza started and how it is structured. Could you cover that?
sure. So, let's skip the mythology and start with sort of the basics of the Yakuza. So originally they're kind of federations of two kinds of sort of outlaws. One were street merchants, which are called tekia, and the other were called bakuto, which were gamblers. So gambling is always illegal. So the ones who are running the gambling, were providing entertainment in the area, and with running gambling, you also have to provide some kind of protection and from thieves who might prey on other gamblers and are people who won't pay their money. And then the merchants were sort of traveling merchants who basically, if Japan's festivals were usually run by the Yakuza, or what we would consider the Yakuza. So they're selling things on the streets during Japan's many festivals. They're the ones running the stalls. selling yakitori or chicken on a stick and those other things. The earliest, what we consider modern organized crime group was Aizuko Tetsukai, which was in Kyoto, um, where Nintendo had its headquarters actually. And they were found by a guy named, Isaac Kotetsu. He was called Kotetsu because he was really tiny, but he had a fist of iron. And, they expanded from just running gambling to loan sharking to, small businesses, extortion, racketeering. Um, and then, the Yamaguchi Gumi, which is the oldest Yakuza group, was founded in 1915 as kind of a federation of dock workers in Kobe, which is a port city. And they've been around now for 100 years. That makes them one of the oldest Japanese companies ever. And even the Yamaguchi Gumi was essentially founded as kind of a corporation. So ostensibly they're uh, a sort of labor union, but they're providing temporary staffing, and then they're running small scale prostitution, loan sharking, all these things. It was only after the Second World War that there was a period of kind of lawlessness in Japanese society. The Japanese police force were basically unarmed. They had been forbidden to deal with, imprison, or harass what were called third party nationals. So all these people who were brought over to Japan as slave labor, the Koreans, the Taiwanese, the Chinese, um, you know, they began sort of taking revenge on their Japanese captors. And they also began running the black markets because they had access to the bases. The Japanese nationals couldn't get to the bases. Everything was in short supply. And during this period of chaos, um, these Yakuza groups came back and reformed, and essentially were sort of a second police force. Now, after a year went by, and the Japanese police were sort of put back into power and given the power to handle everyone, including the third party nationals, the age of sort of Yakuza working as a second police force kind of faded away. But they had already sort of secured a power base all over Japan, in Tokyo, in Kobe, in all the other areas. And the police kind of looked the other way because the Yakuza were providing not only kind of street security and a second police force, but entertainment, right? There's not a lot to do in post-war Japan, except go to a festival, gamble a little bit, and they quickly went from being sort of disorganized crime to organized crime very quickly. Some groups, like the Yamaguchi Gumi, um, were smart enough to absorb like the Korean mafia. So that the Koreans informed like Yanagawa Ika, they sort of um, their own kind of organized crime groups, and some like the Yamaguchi Gumi were like, hey, like it's a meritocracy. Why don't you come join us? And we'll offer you some protection from the police because they're okay with us, they're not okay with you, and you've got a really good business sense. We can learn from each other, and so everybody merged. And then I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but the conservative forces, the the people that helped bring you World War II, um, Kodama Yoshio and these right wingers and these war profiteers were released from prison, as the U.S. decided that to prevent Japan from becoming communist, that they're going to need to let some of the old guard go. And these guys who came back with money, um, to consolidate power and form Japan's first political party, the Liberal Democratic Party, um, tied up with the Yakuza. Japan's leading political party, which has sort of ruled the country for mostly, except for brief periods for ever since 1950s, the Liberal Democratic Party was founded by a Yakuza broker named Kodama Yoshio. Um, so when you have, your own politicians, um, you know, and you have deep political connections, you flourish. I'm not giving you a very brief history. And then one other thing that really helped them gain power and money was in the about 1950, methamphetamines, which had been legal during the Second World War, um, was something that Japan supplied to most of the soldiers, especially the kamikaze, as part of their rations. Um, the Japanese government realized this is a bad idea. We should probably not allow people to buy this over the counter. People get, if you want to sort of a second history of Japanese war atrocities, it's like what happens when you put an entire army on meth? Bad things. Um, anyway, the Japanese government banned it, and then the Yakuza were like, "Oh, we know how to make this stuff," and so they began selling it because there were a lot of addicts, and that brought in a lot of money. Now, some groups like the Yamaguchi-gumi were like, "Oh, meth is a bad thing," so ostensibly they banned the usage of drugs and meth amongst their men, um, and even set up a organization for the elimination of drugs from Japan. So, the Yamaguchi founded this organization, which was heavily advertised about getting rid of drugs from Japan. And, they always insisted that they were humanitarian organizations, preserving the Japanese traditions and keeping the country safe. So they never said we're organized crime groups. And since after the Second World War, people had a lot of mistrust for the Japanese government. The right to assemble was considered very important. And so these groups were not regulated in any way. They existed way out in the open. And to some extent, the police wouldn't touch them or deal with them. So they gained a lot of power very quickly. I mean, they gained so much power and they were so much in the public eye that I think Japan's Wrestling Federation, at a time when wrestling was a huge business in Japan, pro wrestling was what people were into. At one time, the head of that federation included the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi, the head of another organized crime group, and Kodama Yoshio, the right-wing nationalist, up to 1960. And so, some of the Yamaguchi-gumi set up a talent agency called Kobe Genosha, which had some of Japan's most famous singers and entertainers as part of their um, organization. So, meanwhile, so you have the Yakuza basically um, running a lot of the streets in Japan, um, openly having businesses, construction companies, entertainment firms. And then Kodama Yoshio decided, and kind of like something reminiscent of this fictional movie called The Warriors, in which all the gangs of New York unite to unite all the Yakuza groups and create a federation of them, which he did. So, they created this huge federation of organized crime groups, and they sent a letter to the Liberal Democratic Party about 1960, which with suggestions as to what they need to do. And at the time in the Diet, the Parliament, there was one former reporter for the Mainichi newspaper, and he was like, when the Yakuza began telling us how we should be running our country, we have a problem. And that began to spark also with the Olympics coming in 1964, suddenly the Japanese government decided we need to crack down. That began the first crackdown and the first attempt by the government to tell people like, no, Yakuza are bad, very bad. We need to get rid of them. But of course, that was not very successful. And, the Yakuza continued to hold power for many, many years. Tremendous amounts of power, tremendous amounts of capital.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't realize it was so deeply ingrained. So the crackdowns then, were they successful?
Yeah, I mean, they were successful in the sense they got some groups to disband. Like they sort of, and it was more kind of like a show. Like, okay, we're disbanding, and they disbanded, but they changed their name and they went right back to doing what they were doing under a different name. Um, Taoka-san, who is the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi, who was born on March 28th, 1913. I know his birthday because it's one of the only few famous people in Japan I share a birthday with is the Godfather of Godfathers. Obviously, like there's a big difference between 1913 and 1969, but we were both born on March 28th. Anyway, Taoka-san, who was a very charismatic figure, um, and probably the smartest of the Yakuza bosses, was basically told the police, he said, even if I'm the only one left in this organization, I will never disband the organization, which is why the Yamaguchi-gumi has like 100 years of history, more than 100 years. because he refused to disband, and the police were basically unable to do anything about it. I mean, they cracked down on him. They arrested his people on whatever charges they could find. The, the laws were modified so that um, it used to be that you could only arrest people gambling if you caught them in the act, right? They had to be at, like they basically had to have the cards in their hand,
Mhm.
um, which was, and the fact that they wouldn't change that was kind of a sort of like, a thumb in the eye of the Americans, right? Um, you know, so the Yakuza will continue doing that with impunity, and then they changed the law, and you could arrest them after the fact. So that helped them put a couple bosses in jail. Um, but one thing I should say, one reason is that Japan tolerated the Yakuza for so long, and what makes them different from the Italian mafia is that every organization has a set of rules that the members are supposed to follow, the things that will get them banished. And in general, while there's some variations, um, these rules often posted on the wall of the organization, usually in ornate cursive letters, which are: you cannot steal, you cannot commit robbery, that is, stealing with force. You can't sexually assault people, especially in your own neighborhood, and you can't bother ordinary people, and you can't have unnecessary contact with the authorities. What that means is, you know, the police and the Yakuza for many years communicated with each other on a regular basis, but you couldn't tell them everything that you were doing. You couldn't give them too much information. Um, but because they didn't get involved in street crime, they didn't break into people's houses, they didn't allow purse snatchings and robberies on their territory. To some extent, if you had them in your neighborhood, you were safe. They would never bother people in their own neighborhood, um, where they had their offices. Um, and they sort of provided a service, which the services were, you paid them protection money if you had any kind of trouble, hoodlums hanging out in the area, customers wouldn't pay their bills, um, you know, noise from construction, making it impossible to do karaoke. You could go to them and they would take care of those problems for you.
Wow. Okay. So if there were these crackdowns, but they remained deeply ingrained because it's kind of like they sacrificed elements, but then they reformed. How does that carry through to the present day? Does that mean they're still as powerful as ever, or did the power peak?
I think what happened is, sorry, it's a little bit too bright or weirdly bright. You know, with that, like everybody, they get greedy, just like the Italians. So it's like, okay, meth is good money, so they got involved in meth. Um, especially during Japan's kind of real estate bubble, starting in the late '80s. At first, the Yakuza were basically working for the banks. Like, real estate is valuable. Whatever you can acquire, you can turn around and sell very quickly. But Japan has very strong renters laws. So it's very hard to evict people. Um, you can take them to court. It takes forever. You're often going to lose. As long as someone is paying rent, they have a right to live where they live. It's a good thing. But the Yakuza quickly were hired by banks and real estate companies to terrorize people to leave their property, which is something that normally, technically, really only a lawyer is allowed to do. Um, and so they began doing this, and banks would terrorize people, clean out these neighborhoods, um, consolidate the properties, sell them. Huge buildings would go up. A lot of money was being made. And at one point, the Yakuza were like, "Well, why should we be the middleman? Like, instead of just chasing out the tenants, why aren't we acquiring the properties ourselves and turning them around?" So they became heavily involved in the real estate industry. And gradually, despite their, ability to manipulate the press and project this public image of themselves, people became very tired of paying protection money to the Yakuza. And they became tired of getting evicted from their homes, or knowing people were evicted from their homes by the Yakuza. The real estate bubble collapses, and it turns out like that a lot of these distressed properties that are going to have to be seized, um, are owned by the Yakuza. And the Yakuza are not graceful about, um, you know, taking losses. And as the banks start foreclosing on them, one or two bank managers get killed and whacked, and suddenly, no one wants to touch those properties.
Let me just pause you there. Did they have a preferred method of executing bank managers?
Shooting them. Japan is a country with very strict gun laws. Almost, it is possible to get a hunting license, but almost no one owns a gun. And the penalties for owning and the penalties for using a gun or owning a gun or owning a bullet are so severe that ordinary citizen will deal with them. Yeah, if you shoot someone, that sends a message that it's the Yakuza. Um, and you don't have to shoot that many bankers for them to fall in line. Um,
Wow.
what there's a saying in Japanese, "Hyakai." What is it? Ichibatsu hyakai shikazu, uh, which is basically one punishment is worth 100 rules. So make an example out of one person, and that's enough. Um, and I think that the original, I think it was the Sumitomo bank manager who was shot to death. I don't think that was ever solved. Um, but suddenly you have this economic crisis. All Japan is heavily in debt. There's all these companies that are, um, have lost millions to the Yakuza, and in some sense, the taxpayers are supposed to bail them out. And so the Japanese government was like, okay, you know what? This is about 1991. It's like, we need to do something about organized crime. It's also becoming sort of an embarrassment because it's being written about. Like, Japan's gangsters are doing interviews during the bubble period. It became very clear that Japan's gangsters were like, Chicago style Al Capone, you know, mobsters, right? They've got fan magazines. They're in your face. People know who they are. The Japanese government and police don't seem to be able to do anything about them or want to do anything about them. So very weak laws were put on the books in 1992, these anti-organized crime laws. And Itami Juzo, who was a famous film director there, made this movie called Minbo no Onna, The Gentle Art of Japanese Extortion, which was a dark comedy about dealing with the Yakuza. And the message of the film was that if you work with the police and you work with lawyers who specialize in dealing with organized crime. I mean, that says a lot about a country when you have a subclass of lawyers who all they do is deal with organized crime problems, right? There's fewer of them now as the Yakuza fade away. But, that was a specialized part of the industry. Like, how do you deal with the Yakuza? How do you break contracts with them? How do you get them off of your property? How do you stop them from harassing you? Um, anyway, that was the message of his film, which lampooned the Yakuza. It made them look like dishonorable thugs. Um, and most of this film is set in a very fancy hotel, modeled after an actual hotel in Kobe, in which the Yakuza are like, constantly harassing the hotel staff, extorting money from the hotel, uh, you know, uh, in hundreds of ways. So they're portrayed in a not a very nice fashion. Um, and the movie was a hit, but one crime boss, in particular Goto Tadamasa, did not like the film because it made fun of him, and it did not put the Yakuza in a good light. So, five of his goons grabbed the film director in the parking lot in front of his house, and then carved up his face very slowly, um, so it would leave marks, and then fled, and they were caught. And the film director Itami Juzo had a press conference. Um, and I think for many people, it was kind of a wake up call, like, oh yeah, the Yakuza, they're like, these are bad people. Like, just like in this movie, this is what they do. They extort money. Uh, they don't add value. They use, fraudulent schemes to get cash out of innocent citizens. All this talk about not bothering ordinary people, um, that's all a lie too. They're preying on ordinary people, and that began turning the tide. But really, um, these anti-organized crime laws, and I think I've got a chapter in the last Yakuza talking about this in great detail. Um, were designed so that basically the Yakuza got a warning. The second was a cease and desist, and the third strike was you would actually get arrested. So in many ways for the Yakuza, this was kind of like a great thing. So, instead of getting their members arrested for extortion, um, you'd get a warning, and you could do it a second time. And then, then if and it's like you got a warning again, like it's okay, we can quit. So you kind of knew when to quit. And one of the things that also has made the Yakuza trend successful is as a member, the benefits are pretty good in this sense. Not only did the Yamaguchi Gumi start offering kind of like a retirement plan starting in the late 90s as when the group split apart into various factions. Um, but if you remember the Yakuza and you committed a crime on behalf of the organization, whether that was an assassination or roughing up someone who wouldn't pay protection money, and you went to jail, um, they took care of you. I mean, they took care of you in the sense that, while you were in jail, your family was looked after. Uh, Someone regularly was putting money into your account in the prison so you could buy, little tobacco and sundries and things, or they were bringing things directly to you in prison. And when you got out, you got a promotion and a wad of cash. Um, so that really helps ensure loyalty. And to their credit, not only did they do that for um, your family, like, but if you had a wife and a mistress, they looked after both of them, because that's they're very family oriented, right? They understand that maybe not all people you need to support are necessarily your own family. So that was good, right? And it also discouraged people from ratting out members of the police. One of the reasons the Yakuza have never been crushed in the way that you saw with the Italian mafia is that um, until 2 or 3 years ago, there was no plea bargaining in Japan, which means that there's no incentive for anyone to rat out the person above them, right? Most of the time, if you're arrested as a Yakuza, the Yakuza provide the lawyer. I mean, there is a whole genre of lawyers that are basically Yakuza lawyers. That's all they do. A lot of them are ex-prosecutors, so they know, if you know how to prosecute someone, you also know how to screw up a prosecution so that they can't be prosecuted well.
Wow.
So, once you're arrested, it's like your lawyer shows up. He's provided by the organization. Any statement that you make also is going to be shown to the people at the top of the organization because that's your lawyer, right? Your lawyer isn't really your lawyer. You can refuse it, but then of course that already arouses suspicion. So, what are the benefits of ratting out someone above you? Absolutely none. It's as the Japanese say, a hundred negatives without a single plus. So this really encouraged people to keep their mouth shut. It's like you keep your mouth shut. You do the crime, you do the time, you get a reward. If you give someone up, when you get out of prison, you're probably going to disappear. The Yakuza don't kill like the Mexican mafia. They're not, except for some people like Kodo Tadamasa and the Kudo Kai. Um, Generally speaking, the heat that brings from killing someone isn't worth the attention you get from the police and the damage to operations. But doesn't mean they're not above a judicious killing now and then, just to make a point, right? If you threaten people every now and then, you actually have to follow up on those threats.
So that leads me then to ask you about the ranking of the various people involved. So you've got associates, made men, capos, bosses in the Italian mafia. Is there a similar structure or?
Well, so we'll start with the Yamaguchi because it's the biggest, most representative. The Inagawa Kai, which is the third biggest, also has its own structures. Uh, if you're looking at if people who haven't read Tokyo Vice or The Last Yakuza, and you just watch the TV series, which is okay. I mean, it's probably would benefit you to read a book or two in your life. Just saying. The Chihara Kai. which is sort of the good Yakuza in the TV series, are modeled off to the Inagawa Kai. And the bad Yakuza, the Tozawa Gumi, and the organization above them are kind of modeled after the Yamaguchi Gumi. They're from Kansai. So basically, it's a pyramid structure, set up kind of like a nuclear family with no women. Um, at the very top of the organization is the first tier group. So in there, you've got the kumicho, the big kumicho, or the kaicho, the chairman, or the group organ, or the president of the group, however you want to translate it. And then under him, you have the wakagashira, which is the number two. It literally means young head. Even though the wakagashira of the Yamaguchi Gumi is like in his 80s now, that's a whole other issue. And
Mhm.
then you have all the older brothers and younger brothers and people below them. And then you have got a group of sort of second tier bosses, which are called the Jiki-san, so the direct lieutenants. So there's about 100 of them. And then under them you have the third tier groups. So everybody pays to the top. Everybody has a sort of, you know, an oyabun or a father figure above them, except the very top of the organization. So like this Tsukasa Shinobu, he's the head of the Yamaguchi Gumi, has been the head since 2005. I think he's in his 70s or 80s now. I forget. But under him you have his organization, and then under that there's the second tier organizations, the third tier organizations. Um, the ranking is usually Oyabun, father figure, um, the you know the Wakagashira, then the head of the headquarters, Hombucho. And number three is actually, I've been told, the best place to be. You control the money. Um, you don't have to go to the ceremonies. The police are always trying to arrest the number one or the number two. And so you have a sort of like wonderful sort of position where you have power and money and time and are less likely to go to jail. Um, and then under the Hombucho, which is, you have all the various sort of older brothers and then younger brothers. And that is basically the structure of the organization. It gets a little more complicated is because this idea of brotherhood in the Japanese mafia, you know, can be a older brother, younger brother relationship, or can be a brother-brother relationship, or it can be like, like you're 60% superior than me and I'm 40% superior than you. You know, the relationships of these brotherhoods usually sealed by ceremonial ties with a sake glass, sometimes just sealed by a beer. Um, it's kind of a proclamation of friendship. Like, I like you. Like, I admire the way you do things. Like, you're my buddy. Okay, now we're Kyodai-bun. Now we're brothers. Um, that can also extend to people outside of your organization. So that becomes a kind of weird diplomacy, kind of like medieval marriages and stuff. So, for example, the in the Yamaguchi-gumi, Takeuchi-san, who's one of the top members of the Kodokai, he has a blood brother relationship of equal proportions with Uchibori Kazuo, who is the head now of the Inagawa Kai. So there are these two groups, supposedly supposed to be rivals, but the tops of the organization are blood brothers. I don't think the Yakuza use the word blood brothers because that would actually be, um, relations by blood, but they're Kyodai-bun. They're brothers through this pledge of, brotherhood. Um, that makes it very hard for them to go to war, right? Because you're my brother. We're supposed to get along. We like each other, and that makes the other organizational members toe the line. So except for the Yamaguchi-gumi, which split apart um, into one group, into two groups in 2015, and then the other groups. There's not a lot of gang wars among the Yakuza these days. There used to be. It's just not profitable. And everybody tries to get along because, that works better. It wasn't always that way. So you have these weird things where like Yakuza groups send each other, New Year's cards. Can you imagine like, the Chinese mafia and the Italian mafia bosses sending each other New Year's cards? So first of all, he said, "I know where you live," right?
So the guy on the magazine cover, have they tried to arrest him?
Oh, yeah, they have. They actually, like he asked shortly after Power. they were basically able to put him in jail for a very long time on gun charges. And it worked like this: his bodyguard had a gun on him, like on as he was coming up to Tokyo. And the rationale of the court was, obviously, that your bodyguard is armed. That makes you an accessory to possessing a gun. And they put him away in jail for a long time like that. His number two, they were later able to put away on extortion charges. See if we can find a picture of him. His number two has like sort of his eye perpetually squinty. It's just really terrifying. Takayama Kiyoshi-san.
Are they both released now?
Yeah, they're both out of jail.
Are they
Takayama-san.
back in the same spots?
Yeah, back in the same spots. Let's see if we have Takayama over here. What's kind of fascinating about this is like this will tell you a lot about the Yakuza visually. First of all, you've got this magazine was finally forced out of business in about the year 2018. So there are no monthly magazines. There are weekly magazines that still have updates on the Yakuza, but as a Yakuza watcher, okay, Kudokai, which is probably the most violent Yakuza group in Japan. Nomura, Mr. Nomura, who is facing the death penalty, he saw one of these ads, and he got a enlargement procedure, and his nurse laughed at him when he was getting it done and said, I can't believe that a guy who's so heavily tattooed like you can't deal with a little prick of a needle. And he was so angry that allegedly he put a hit out on the nurse, who survived. But that was of the many charges that were against him, including some actual murders.
Wow.
It's one of the reasons he probably got the death penalty.
Wow. Jake, you started out telling us about a serial killer.
Oh yeah,
What?
yeah.
What? Can we get a bit of details on that story, please? Because it sounded fascinating.
Oh, okay. So the serial killer story. So in Saitama, there was actually an ex-Yakuza named Sekine Gen and his wife Hiroko, who were running a pet shop. They'd been running a pet shop for years. But one of the things that sometimes they'd sell people purebred dogs at a very exorbitant prices. But sometimes they would sell them a dog that was sick or couldn't reproduce. And then when people would complain to them or say, "Okay, I'm going to the police because you defrauded me," um, he and his wife would kill them and chop up the body and feed it to the dogs. And so over a 10-year period, about 10 people disappeared around Sekine again. And then maybe he just got, um, convinced that he was untouchable in about 90, starting around 92, 91, 91, 92. About four people around him vanished. One was a housewife, one was a businessman. And the other was this Yakuza boss named Endo and his driver Wakui. And the thing they all had in common was they're all closely dealing with Sekine again and his wife, and they vanished. And the Saitama police had known that there were people around them vanishing for years, but the investigations had never gone anywhere. So they really began looking at these people in like 1992. And in 1993, when I first joined the Yomiuri Shimbun, I was at the Saitama. Everybody understood, that the police were investigating this and they were looking, at these missing people. And I think we had about four newbies on the police beat, right? So we're all, in addition to our daily duties, everybody got assigned a missing person to look for, knowing that the police would probably eventually make arrests. So I got assigned to find out what happened to Endo and his driver. And this is, in northern Saitama, Konanmachi. So, one of the things that we realized as we were working on the story is that someone from the organized crime task force had been sent to join the homicide squad, um, because homicide detectives are not very good with Yakuza. That's not their forte, right? They're not good at interrogating these people. They don't understand the psychology. They don't know how to get information out of them. Um, so as I began tracking this Yakuza boss and and his colleague, um, trying to figure out why Sekine again would want them dead. Definitely, there was no doubt that they knew each other very well. I also realized that this cop who had been sent from the organized crime task force to the homicide squad probably knew a lot. And so after many efforts, I sort of I did befriend him. I befriended him and his family, through persistence, through bringing ice cream to his kids, um,
Mm.
just like in the TV series. I think Katagiri is modeled after this Detective Sekuchi. And, and to some extent, he would sort of tell me what was going on in the investigation. Um, but, uh, not enough that I could really have a scoop early on because, they were trying various methods to arrest Sekine again. Because typically Japanese cops, when there's a homicide investigation, arrest someone on a lesser charge and then use the 23 days that you can hold someone in jail without much access to their lawyer, to browbeat them into confessing to the actual crime they want them for, which is murder. Often, the first step in a homicide investigation is someone is arrested for improperly disposing of the body. I mean, it
Mm.
always follows that pattern, almost always, or some other minor charge like extortion, or you know, um, or even bizarre things like not registering your new car in the place that you've moved to, whatever you can use to get them into jail so you can interrogate them. But so what's interesting is I don't know anything about Yakuza at this point. I mean, I really don't. So you know, I went to the boss that disappeared. Endo was a member of Takaragumi. So I'm like, okay, I'll just go to the Takaragumi office, which is outside of this park in Konanmachi, and ring the doorbell. And I didn't. I rang the doorbell and and I introduced myself, and like 3 seconds later, these thugs come running out like, "Rah!" And I'm just running away to the taxi park nearby. And I was like, okay, clearly, clearly this isn't working the way that I wanted it to. So, there were other ways to approach the organized crime group. Just kind of trial by fire. But I was able to find through just persistence and talking to people, and in this town where Endo was the number two in the organization, Takanagumi, people liked it. I mean, like, people were concerned about it. Like what happened to Endo? Yeah, where did he disappear? Someone directed me to a bar where his mistress was working. Like, everybody knew he had a mistress. It was kind of like, like, I don't know. I mean, I mean, I guess his wife, who never would talk to me, um, was, I mean, I would guess that's that way it was. And I ended up dating the mistress for a while. I think in the Tokyo Vice, the book, I just sort of disguised her name a little bit, but I don't think at this point she cares anymore because she's married with a different name, so it doesn't matter. Um, what it's like 93. It's like been 30 years. I think we're okay. And I didn't use a real name in the book anyway. But at the time I was writing the book, I was still like, probably better shade these details a little bit. And she was interesting, and she was turned out to be a great source, um, as to how he knew Sekine again and what their relationship was, and it became apparent to me from the conversation I had with her, and other of his brothers and associates, that he had been blackmailing Sekine again, that he had figured out how Sekine had killed two people and what he had done, and was extorting money from him. And Sekine was kind of a celebrity, because he appeared on Japanese TV shows. He was making a lot of money. He was opening a new pet shop called African Kennel. He was, the whole business in purebred dogs was a huge a scam, but a money making scam. Um, and it turned out eventually what we found out was that uh, he had been blackmailed that Endo had been blackmailing Sekine, and one day Sekine decided I'm just going to kill this guy, and so he offered him a stamina drink called Yunkeru. And Yunkeru, like Japan has these stamina drinks, and I don't know how to kind of like in the days before there was Red Bull. Japan had a whole series of stamina drinks. Yunko by Sato Pharmaceuticals was one of the most popular, and they would sell like these like $30 versions of the drinks with full of ginseng and caffeine and things to pick you up. And he poisoned, I think he used strychnine, and he poisoned the drink and gave it to Endo and his driver, and they drank it down stupidly, and they died. And then they hauled the body off to Guma, where they chopped it up, and then uh, they took off the flesh, and then they burnt the bones in a steel drum, so there was almost nothing left. Actually, one of the things that was valuable about Endo's case was that Endo had this very expensive Dunhill, gold-plated lighter, um, which they had stupidly not completely burned to a crisp, and that became one of the things that was able to identify him. That also became one of the things I was able to tell, like, you know, in a weird ways, that sometimes, it's not easy for the Japanese cops to talk to the organized crime members, but it's easier for me because, you know, they're more careless, right? I'm just a stupid reporter. So some information I would like feed back to, Sekiguchi-san and the squad, like, okay, Endo has this lighter. It could be useful in identifying him. It looks like this. Here's a picture of him with the lighter. Um, uh, and that was the serial killer and the wife and the husband thing. Eventually, and this is also in Tokyo Vice, the book, but I don't think I'm spoiling you by telling this. Eventually, what happened is the head of the Japanese police were getting nowhere in their investigation, unable to arrest this guy on charges, you know, uh, and not going very well. And then Takada-san of the Takada Gumi decided, like, you know what? I'm pretty sure this guy killed my number two. So I'm gonna find out what happened. So Takada Gumi would just sort of kidnap people close to Sekine again, and then he would drag them to the office and they would interrogate them. And so finally, they got one associate of Sekine's driver to make a recording with this guy named Shima, like in which Shima basically said on tape that there's no way you'll find no way they'll find the body because we made the bodies invisible. And this in this tape with this sort of associate with the Yakuza, in which basically Shima is saying, like, I know where the bodies are and how they were gotten rid of. They gave this tape to Seki. So Takada gave the tape to Sekiguchi-san, who was the detective from the organized crime working on that. And they were like, okay, we need to arrest the driver. And if we arrest the driver, then we will have the information that will allow us to find the bodies and we can arrest this guy for improper disposal of a corpse and we can break the case. And that's how it was done. It was a tape from the Yakuza that broke the case.
Wow, that's absolutely mind blowing.
And
Good
and
grief.
and and then something that came out later in the later with later in the court proceedings, Shima, who had blabbed everything to the cops, it seemed to be that even though there's not plea bargaining in Japan, that they made a deal um, with him, which is like, you give us everything, you take the witness stand, and we'll let you walk and we won't put you as an accessory to murder. We'll just try you for improper disposal of a corpse. You're part in that. Um, and when they did arrest him on charges of murder, he just went ballistic and he blabbed to the press that this wasn't the deal we had. And I think eventually the prosecutors dropped the charges, so he never went to trial for murder charges.
Wow.
He wrote a book about it, which very few people read, called like the dog breeder serial killer murders. I think the actual Japanese title of the book is like the serial killings of dog lovers.
Oh my goodness. Wow, I'm sure you've got tons of stories, Jake, but we've run out of time. Do you want
Oh,
to tell
okay.
the viewers? Do you want to tell the viewers where they can find you and support you?
Sure. You can find me in any bookstore. If you're really interested in the Yakuza, look for The Last Yakuza, Life and Death in the Japanese Underworld. That the UK edition of that is coming out this year. The Australian edition and US edition are already out, but you can buy a nice copy at your local bookstore anywhere in England. Tokyo Vice is also still available. Or you can listen to the podcast I did about missing people in Japan called The Evaporated Gone with the Gods. That's on wherever you listen to your podcast, and that has some Yakuza content, because when people disappear, of course, Yakuza are often involved as a reason for them disappearing, are part of the process of how they disappeared, or who they are running away from.
Well, I think we've only scratched the surface, so I'd love to get you back to continue this at some point. But huge thank you for getting up so early in Japan. And viewers, if you've enjoyed this as much as me, please check out Jake's links. I'll put them below this video, and take care wherever you are in the world. So huge thank you, Jake. Cheers.
Thank you. It was a delight being on the show.